The torrential rain had turned the streets of Silver Creek into a treacherous swamp of mud and debris when Abigail Turner stepped off the afternoon stagecoach in the spring of 1872. Her dreams as sodden as her traveling dress. The frontier town in Wyoming territory hardly resembled the promising opportunity her late father's letter had described. As the stagecoach pulled away, splashing dirty water onto her already ruined skirts, Abigail took one uncertain step forward, then another, before her worn-out boots lost purchase in the slick mud. "Oh," she cried out, arms flailing as she pitched forward, her carpetbag flying from her grasp. The humiliation burned hotter than the pain of her scraped palms as she tried to push herself up from the muck, only to slip again. The few townsfolk hurrying past kept their heads down against the rain, ignoring her plight entirely. Until a strong pair of hands gripped her by the waist, lifting her effortlessly to her feet. "Careful there, miss," came a deep voice from behind her. "These streets can be mighty treacherous after a spring storm." Abigail turned, mud-splattered and mortified, to face her rescuer. He stood tall beneath a wide-brimmed hat, rainwater streaming off its edges. His shoulders were broad beneath a worn leather duster, and his eyes were the precise color of the sky just after a storm, a clear, piercing blue that seemed to look straight through her. "You belong beside me," he said, shifting to position himself between her and the muddy street. "Let's get you somewhere dry before you catch your death." He reached down to retrieve her carpetbag, grimacing at its soaked condition. I can manage," Abigail stammered, trying to regain her dignity despite her disheveled appearance. "Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Wyatt," he replied, touching the brim of his hat. "Wyatt Preston, town marshal of Silver Creek, such as it is." His smile transformed his weathered face, softening the hard angles into something almost boyish. "And you would be Abigail Turner," she said, attempting to brush mud from her skirts and only managing to smear it further. "I've come to claim my father's property, Joseph Turner." He wrote that he had established a small ranch outside of town. The marshal's smile faded. "Turner's place, that's a hard 3 miles out of town, miss, and if you're Joseph Turner's daughter." He hesitated, studying her face more carefully. "I'm afraid I've got some unfortunate news that may not have reached you yet." Abigail's heart sank. "He's dead, isn't he? The letters stopped coming 6 months ago." She squared her shoulders, refusing to let tears form. "I suspected as much when I received no reply to my last 3 communications." "Still, I had hoped." Wyatt nodded solemnly. "Pneumonia took him this past winter. I'm sorry, Miss Turner, he was a good man. Quiet, kept to himself, but always paid his taxes and helped neighbors when needed." A wagon rattled past, sending another splash of muddy water toward them. With surprising quickness, Wyatt turned, using his duster to shield Abigail from the worst of it. "Come along," he said gently. "The Silverado Hotel has clean rooms. We can sort everything out once you're dry and have had something warm to eat." Abigail hesitated. At 22, she had spent the last 4 years teaching at a girls' school in Boston after her mother's death. The journey west had consumed nearly all of her savings, and the prospect of a hotel room, even in a frontier town, seemed an extravagance she could ill afford. "I cannot impose," she began. "It's no imposition," Wyatt insisted, guiding her toward the hotel's covered porch. "Your father left his affairs in order. The ranch is yours by right. It just needs some attention after sitting empty these months." The marshal's kindness was overwhelming after weeks of traveling alongside strangers who regarded a woman journeying alone with either suspicion or unwelcome interest. As they stepped onto the hotel's porch, Abigail felt a curious sensation, like she had reached the end of one journey only to find herself at the threshold of another, far more significant one. The hotel lobby was mercifully warm, with a crackling fire in the stone hearth. Several men seated in leather chairs glanced up at their entrance, their expressions shifting from curiosity to surprise as they recognized the marshal's companion. "Margaret," Wyatt called to the gray-haired woman behind the reception desk. "Miss Turner here needs a room and a hot bath drawn up immediately." The woman assessed Abigail's bedraggled appearance with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. "Joseph Turner's girl, we'd about given up hope you'd ever arrive." She reached for a key from the wall behind her. "Room 203, top of the stairs. Best view in the house, looks right over the mountains when the weather clears." "I cannot possibly," Abigail began, but Wyatt cut her off gently. "Your father paid up 6 months in advance for whenever you might arrive," he explained. "Said his daughter would need a proper place to stay while she got her bearings." Fresh tears threatened at this evidence of her father's foresight and care. He had known she would come, even if he might not live to see it. "The bath will be up directly," Margaret promised. "And I'll send up some stew. You look half-starved, child." An hour later, scrubbed clean and dressed in her one remaining unwrinkled dress, Abigail sat by the window of her room, watching the rain continue its assault on the muddy streets below. The stew had been hearty and filling, the bread fresh and warm. For the first time in weeks, she felt almost human again. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. "Miss Turner, it's Marshal Preston." Abigail smoothed her skirts and opened the door to find Wyatt standing there, hat in hand, his own clothes changed for dry ones. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said, "but I thought you might want to discuss your father's property sooner rather than later." She invited him in, maintaining a proper distance as they sat at the small table near the window. Wyatt laid out several folded papers. "Your father's deed to the property, 160 acres under the Homestead Act. He'd worked it nearly 5 years, so the land is fully vested. There's a small cabin, a barn that needs some repair, and about 20 head of cattle, assuming the winter didn't take too many." Abigail stared at the documents, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. "I know nothing about ranching, Marshal Preston. I'm a schoolteacher." Wyatt's expression brightened. "Are you now? Silver Creek's been trying to establish a proper school for going on 2 years. The children are currently learning their letters in the back room of the church, when Pastor Miller isn't using it for services." Hope flickered in Abigail's chest. "Are you suggesting I might teach here?" "I'm suggesting you might have options," Wyatt clarified. "As for the ranch, there are men in town who could help run it for a percentage of the profits. Your father had hired the Cooper brothers last fall to help with the herd. They're trustworthy, if a bit rough around the edges." Abigail studied the marshal's face, noting the kindness in his eyes. "Why are you helping me, Marshal Preston?" Wyatt's gaze dropped to his hat, which he turned slowly in his hands. "Your father once did me a good turn when I first came to these parts. I was younger then, more foolish. Got myself shot up in a dispute that wasn't even mine to begin with. Joseph found me bleeding by the creek and hauled me back to his cabin. Nursed me back to health over 3 weeks without once asking what trouble I'd gotten myself into." He looked back up at her, his expression earnest. "I owe him a debt I can never repay. Helping his daughter is the least I can do." The rain finally stopped around sunset, and Abigail ventured downstairs for dinner in the hotel's small dining room. She had barely taken her seat when a flurry of activity at the entrance caught her attention. 3 men burst in, their expressions urgent as they scanned the room. "Marshal." One called, spotting Wyatt at a corner table. "Trouble at the Rusty Spur. Thompson and Miller are at it again, and this time they've both drawn iron." Wyatt rose immediately, setting his napkin aside with a sigh. He paused at Abigail's table. "Duty calls, Miss Turner. We'll continue our discussion tomorrow if that suits you. I can take you out to see the ranch." Before she could respond, he was gone, striding purposefully toward what sounded like a potentially deadly confrontation. Abigail's appetite diminished as she contemplated the dangers this man faced regularly in his role as peacekeeper. After a restless night filled with dreams of her father's face and unfamiliar landscapes, Abigail woke to brilliant sunshine streaming through her window. Silver Creek looked transformed in the morning light, the mud-slicked streets now merely damp, the distant mountains crisp and clear against the blue sky. A knock at her door revealed Margaret, the hotel proprietress, bearing a breakfast tray. "Marshal Preston sends his apologies, Miss Turner. Last night's disturbance required more attention than expected. He asks if you might be ready at 10 o'clock for the journey to your father's property." Promptly at 10, Abigail descended to the hotel lobby to find Wyatt waiting, a fresh bruise darkening his left cheekbone. "Your face," she exclaimed before she could check herself. Wyatt's hand rose self-consciously to the injury. "Just a reminder that some men don't appreciate being separated from their whiskey," he said with a wry smile. "It looks worse than it feels." Outside, a wagon stood ready, hitched to two sturdy horses. Wyatt helped her up to the seat, his hands strong and steady at her waist. The simple contact sent an unexpected warmth through her, which she promptly attributed to the bright spring sunshine. As they left the town behind, the landscape opened up before them, rolling grasslands dotted with wildflowers, stands of cottonwood trees marking the course of creeks, and the ever-present mountains rising in the distance. Abigail breathed deeply, finding the air sweet and clean after the coal smoke of Boston. "It's beautiful," she murmured. Wyatt glanced at her, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Most Easterners don't see it that way at first. They notice what's missing: the fancy buildings, the crowds, the society." "Perhaps I was never suited for those things," Abigail admitted. "My mother always said I had too much wilderness in my soul for drawing rooms and tea parties." The confession seemed to please him. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, until Wyatt pointed to a distant rise where a simple cabin stood against the sky. "There it is, Turner's place, your place now." As they drew nearer, Abigail's heart sank. The cabin looked weathered and neglected, with one shutter hanging askew and the small garden plot overgrown with weeds. The barn beyond listed slightly to one side, its door hanging open. "It's been empty since January," Wyatt said gently, noting her expression, "but the bones are good. Your father built it solid." They pulled up before the cabin, and Wyatt helped her down from the wagon. Taking a deep breath, Abigail approached the door, which opened with a protesting creak. Inside, dust motes danced in the sunlight streaming through the windows. A simple table and chairs, a cook stove, shelves with a few books and dishes, the sparse furnishings of a man who lived alone. Yet there were touches that spoke of care: hand-carved details on the chair backs, curtains faded but once cheerful, a braided rug before the hearth. On the mantel stood a single photograph in a wooden frame, a younger version of herself with her parents, taken before her mother's illness. Abigail picked it up, her throat tight. "He spoke of you often," Wyatt said from the doorway. "Said you had your mother's beauty and his stubborn determination." A sound between a laugh and a sob escaped her. He was right about the stubborn part. She moved through the small cabin, touching objects her father had touched, opening the single door to the bedroom where a narrow bed stood neatly made, as if awaiting his return. On a peg hung a woman's shawl, her mother's, she realized preserved all these years. "I can't stay here tonight," she said suddenly, turning to Wyatt. "Not yet, it's 2. "Of course," he agreed immediately. "The hotel room is paid through the week. That gives you time to decide what you want to do." They spent the next hour examining the property. The barn housed a plow, some tools, and a single horse that looked up hopefully at their entrance. In the pasture beyond, Abigail counted 17 cattle grazing peacefully. "Not a fortune," Wyatt remarked, "but enough to build on if that's what you choose." As they prepared to return to town, the distant sound of hoofbeats drew their attention. 2 riders approached, pulling up short when they spotted the wagon. "Marshal," called the older of the 2 men, a weathered fellow with a graying beard. "Everything all right out here?" "Cooper," Wyatt greeted him. "Just bringing Miss Turner to see her father's place. Miss Turner, this is Sam Cooper and his brother Daniel. They helped your father with the cattle last season." The men removed their hats, nodding respectfully. "Real sorry about your pa, miss," Sam said. "He was a fine man. We've been checking on the stock every few days since he passed, making sure no rustlers got ideas." "That's very kind of you," Abigail said, touched by this evidence of respect for her father. "I'm grateful for your consideration." "It weren't nothing," Daniel, the younger brother, mumbled. "Your pa would have done the same for anybody." An arrangement was quickly reached. The Cooper brothers would continue to mine the cattle for a share of the eventual profits when they were driven to market in the fall. They promised to help with repairs to the barn and cabin as well. asking only fair wages for their labor. As Abigail and Wyatt headed back to town, she felt a curious mixture of emotions: grief for the father she would never see again, anxiety about her uncertain future, but also a growing sense of possibility. "You're quiet," Wyatt observed as the town came into view. "I'm thinking," she replied. "About what it means to start over completely. I came west expecting to find my father and perhaps a new purpose. Now I must find that purpose on my own." "Not entirely on your own," Wyatt corrected gently. "Silver Creek isn't much, but its people look after each other. Your father understood that, became part of it. You can too if you choose to stay." Their eyes met briefly, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. Abigail looked away first, her cheeks warming. The next morning brought an invitation from Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield, head of the town's small school committee, to discuss the possibility of Abigail taking over teaching duties. By week's end, she had agreed to teach the town's 27 school-age children beginning the following Monday. "It's not much pay," Mrs. Whitfield warned her, "but the town council has approved funds to convert the old mercantile into a proper schoolhouse by autumn." With teaching secured, Abigail turned her attention to her father's property. Each day after school, Wyatt would appear to drive her out to the ranch, where they worked side by side with the Cooper brothers to repair the cabin and barn. Abigail learned to mend fences, tend the kitchen garden she'd replanted, and even handle the gentle mare her father had kept for riding into town. Throughout those long spring days, she came to know Wyatt Preston as more than just the town marshal. She learned he had fought for the Union in the war, rising to the rank of captain before a bullet to the shoulder ended his military career. That he had drifted west afterward, seeking purpose, until finding it in the badge he now wore. That he read Shakespeare by lamplight and could recite entire passages from memory. And Wyatt, in turn, discovered the determined spirit beneath Abigail's proper exterior. He watched with admiration as she rolled up her sleeves to scrub years of grime from the cabin's floors, as she patiently taught the town's most stubborn children their letters, as she stood her ground against the mercantile owner who tried to overcharge her for supplies. One evening in late May, as they returned from the ranch under a sky painted with the fiery colors of sunset, Wyatt suddenly pulled the wagon to a halt beside a meadow carpeted with wildflowers. "I want to show you something," he said, helping her down. He led her through the flowers to where a small creek bubbled over rocks. "Your father showed me this spot when I first arrived, said it was where he proposed to your mother when they came west." Abigail's breath caught. "He never told me that story." "Some memories are too precious to share easily," Wyatt said softly, "but he wanted you to know this place someday." They stood in silence as the sunset deepened, casting long shadows across the meadow. When Wyatt's hand found hers, Abigail didn't pull away. His fingers were calloused from hard work, but his touch was gentle as he interlaced them with hers. "Abigail," he began, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "I know you've only been in Silver Creek a short while, but the crack of a rifle shot cut through the evening stillness, followed immediately by the whine of a bullet passing nearby." Wyatt reacted instinctively, pulling Abigail down into the tall grass beside him. "Stay down," he ordered, drawing his revolver. Another shot rang out, striking a tree behind them. "Rustlers?" Abigail whispered, heart pounding. "More likely the Thompson gang," Wyatt replied grimly. "I arrested their youngest brother last week for holding up the stage. They swore revenge." He peered cautiously over the grass. "There are at least 2 of them on the ridge. We need to get to the wagon and back to town." He glanced at her with concern. "Can you run when I say?" Abigail nodded, gathering her skirts in preparation. When Wyatt gave the signal, they dashed for the wagon, bullets kicking up dirt at their heels. Wyatt practically threw her onto the seat before leaping up beside her and slapping the reins against the horses' backs. The wagon lurched forward as another shot splintered the wood of the seat between them. "Keep your head down," Wyatt shouted above the thunder of hooves and wheels as he pushed the team to a dangerous pace. Abigail clung to the seat, terror and exhilaration mingling in her veins as they careened toward town. When they finally reached Silver Creek, Wyatt drove straight to the marshal's office. Inside, he quickly assembled a posse to pursue the would-be assassins, but not before ensuring Abigail was safely escorted to the hotel. "Lock your door," he instructed her, his expression grave. "I'll return when I can." It was nearly dawn when a soft knock roused Abigail from her fitful doze in the armchair by the window. She had refused to undress or go to bed, too anxious about Wyatt's safety. When she opened the door, he stood there, haggard and dusty, but whole. "You're safe," she breathed, relief washing over her. "We caught one of them," he reported wearily. "The other escaped into the hills, but they won't trouble you again." "Me," Abigail repeated in confusion. "Why would you think they were after me?" Wyatt's expression turned grim. "Because the one we caught confessed they were hired to scare you off your land. Someone wants that property, Abigail. But who and why? It's just a small ranch with a few cattle." "That's what I intend to find out," Wyatt promised. "In the meantime, I think you should stay in town. It's not safe at the ranch until we get to the bottom of this." The next few days passed in a blur of tension. Wyatt insisted on escorting Abigail to and from the schoolhouse, and the Cooper brothers took turns keeping watch at the ranch. Rumors swirled through town that gold had been discovered on Turner land, that a railroad spur was planned nearby, that old Joseph Turner had been murdered rather than dying of natural causes. Through it all, Abigail refused to be intimidated. "This is my home now," she told Wyatt firmly when he suggested she might be safer returning east. "I won't be frightened away." Her determination only deepened his admiration for her. One evening, as they sat on the hotel's porch after dinner, Wyatt finally gave voice to the suspicion that had been growing in his mind. "I think this might have something to do with Wallace Blackburn," he said quietly. "He owns most of the land northeast of town, including the water rights to several creeks. Your father's property controls access to the best pass through the mountains to the new mining operations in the next valley. Blackburn's been trying to establish a toll road." "And my father wouldn't sell," Abigail guessed. Wyatt nodded. "Joseph was stubborn about maintaining free passage, said the mountains belonged to everyone." The next morning, a letter arrived for Abigail, delivered by Blackburn's foreman. It contained an offer to purchase her property for twice its apparent value. Wyatt advised caution when she showed it to him. "It's still far less than the land is worth if Blackburn plans to control that mountain pass," he warned. "And I don't trust a man who makes offers before paying condolences." As if summoned by their discussion, Wallace Blackburn himself appeared at the schoolhouse the following afternoon, just as Abigail was dismissing her students. A corpulent man in his 50s with small, calculating eyes, he doffed his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "Miss Turner, a pleasure to make your acquaintance at last. I was a great admirer of your late father." "Indeed," Abigail replied coolly. "How strange that he never mentioned you in his letters." Blackburn's smile tightened. "Joseph was a private man. But I'm sure he would want you to consider my offer carefully. A young woman alone has no business trying to run a ranch in this territory. It's dangerous." The implied threat hung in the air between them. Before Abigail could respond, Wyatt's voice came from behind her. "Is that so, Blackburn? Sounds almost like you're predicting trouble." The rancher's expression soured at the marshal's appearance. "Just stating facts, Preston. No need to go looking for offense where none is intended." "I believe I am capable of making my own decisions regarding my property, Mr. Blackburn," Abigail said firmly. "And I'm not interested in selling at this time." Blackburn's face darkened. "You'd be wise to reconsider, Miss Turner. Accidents happen out here in the wilderness. Fires, stampedes. All manner of misfortunes." "That almost sounds like a threat," Wyatt said quietly, his hand resting casually near his holster. "And threatening a citizen of Silver Creek is something I take very seriously." For a tense moment, the two men stared at each other, then Blackburn forced a laugh. "You misunderstand me, Marshal. I'm merely concerned for the lady's welfare." He turned back to Abigail. "My offer stands until the end of the month. After that, well, values have a way of changing rapidly in these parts." After he departed, Abigail released a shaky breath. He as much as admitted to being behind the shooting, but admitted nothing we could arrest him for, Wyatt said grimly. Blackburn's careful that way, always keeps his own hands clean. That night, Abigail woke to shouts and the acrid smell of smoke. Hurrying to her window, she saw flames licking at the roof of the building across the street, the newly renovated schoolhouse, where she had moved her students just the previous week. By the time she reached the street, a bucket brigade had formed, but it was clear the building couldn't be saved. The townspeople watched in dismay as the flames consumed what had been a symbol of their community's growth and progress. Wyatt found her in the crowd and pulled her aside. "This was deliberate," he said in a low voice. "The fire started in 3 separate places, Blackburn sending you a message." Anger replaced Abigail's initial shock. "Then I have a message for him as well. I won't be intimidated." The next day, while Wyatt was occupied with investigating the fire, Abigail made her decision. She hired a wagon and drove herself out to the ranch, where she informed the Cooper brothers of her plan. By the time Wyatt tracked her down that evening, she had already set things in motion. "Are you trying to get yourself killed?" he demanded, finding her calmly cooking dinner in the cabin. "Blackburn's men could return at any time. Let them," Abigail replied with steel in her voice. "I've sent word to every rancher within 50 miles that Wallace Blackburn is attempting to seize control of the mountain pass. Sam Cooper rode out this morning with the messages. By tomorrow, everyone will know what's at stake." Wyatt stared at her in astonishment. "You're playing a dangerous game, Abigail." "No, I'm refusing to play Blackburn's game at all," she corrected. "My father believed this land should remain free for all to use. I intend to honor that belief." Despite his concerns, Wyatt couldn't help but admire her courage. He insisted on staying at the ranch that night, sleeping on a bedroll by the door while Abigail took the bedroom. Neither of them slept much, listening for any sound that might signal an attack. Dawn broke peacefully, however, and with it came unexpected visitors. One by one, the neighboring ranchers began to arrive, having received Abigail's messages. They gathered in the yard, a dozen weather-beaten men with determined expressions. "Miss Turner," said old Frank Dawson, the most respected rancher in the territory, "we've come to let you know you ain't standing alone against Blackburn. Your daddy was right about that pass. It belongs to all of us, not just one greedy man." Throughout the day, more supporters arrived, until the ranch yard resembled an impromptu town meeting. Women brought food, children played in the grass, and men discussed strategy for countering Blackburn's plans. It was, Abigail realized with a mixture of amazement and pride, exactly the kind of community her father had valued. Wallace Blackburn arrived late in the afternoon, accompanied by 6 armed men, his face purpled with rage when he saw the gathering. "What is the meaning of this?" he bellowed, dismounting. Abigail stepped forward, Wyatt at her side. "This is what community looks like, Mr. Blackburn. These people have come to support my right to determine the future of my property and to ensure that the mountain pass remains open to all, as my father intended." Blackburn's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the crowd, clearly recognizing that he was outnumbered. "This changes nothing," he hissed. "You'll regret crossing me, girl." "That's enough, Blackburn," Wyatt said sharply. "I've got witnesses who'll testify your men set fire to the schoolhouse." "That's arson, and I've got a jail cell waiting for you back in town." One of Blackburn's men reached for his gun, but Dawson and 3 other ranchers immediately drew their weapons. "Don't be foolish, son," Dawson warned. "There's a lot more of us than there are of you." A tense silence fell over the gathering. Then, slowly, Blackburn raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "You haven't heard the last of this," he warned as Wyatt moved to handcuff him. "Actually, I believe we have," Abigail replied calmly. "Because tomorrow I'm signing papers to place the mountain pass in a perpetual trust for public use. Mr. Dawson and the other ranchers have agreed to serve as trustees." The look of impotent fury on Blackburn's face as Wyatt led him away would remain one of Abigail's most satisfying memories in years to come. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, with impromptu music and dancing in the yard. As the moon rose over the mountains, Abigail found a moment of quiet on the cabin's small porch. Wyatt joined her there after ensuring Blackburn was securely in the town jail under his deputy's watch. "What you did today was remarkable," he said softly, "and dangerous and brave." Abigail smiled. "I had a good example to follow." She hesitated, then added, "Both my father and you." Wyatt took her hand, his touch sending that now familiar warmth through her. "Before we were interrupted that evening by the creek, there was something I wanted to tell you." "Yes." Abigail's heart quickened as he moved closer. "From the moment I lifted you out of that mud outside of town, something told me you belonged beside me," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "Every day since has only confirmed that feeling. I know it hasn't been long, but out here, life doesn't always give us the luxury of time." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a simple gold band that gleamed in the moonlight. "This was my mother's. I've carried it for years, waiting for the right woman to give it to." Abigail's breath caught as he dropped to one knee before her. "Abigail Turner, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? I can't promise an easy life, but I can promise to love you faithfully for all of mine." Tears sprang to Abigail's eyes as she looked down at this man who had become so dear to her in such a short time. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Wyatt Preston, I will marry you." His smile rivaled the brightness of the stars overhead as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to take her in his arms. Their first kiss was sweet and tender, full of promise for the future they would build together. The wedding took place a month later in the newly rebuilt schoolhouse with the entire town in attendance. Abigail wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in a trunk her father had kept all these years. Wyatt, resplendent in a new suit, couldn't take his eyes off his bride as she walked toward him on Frank Dawson's arm. In the years that followed, the Preston Ranch flourished under their joint care. Abigail continued to teach, eventually training other teachers as Silver Creek grew into a proper town with a mayor and town council. Wyatt served as marshal until the territory achieved statehood, then turned his attention fully to ranching and raising their 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter, who inherited their mother's determination and their father's sense of justice. The mountain pass remained open to all, becoming a vital link in the region's development. And on warm summer evenings, long after their children were grown with families of their own, Wyatt and Abigail could still be found walking hand in hand through the wildflower meadow by the creek, remembering the day a muddy street and a chance encounter had changed their lives forever.